A teenager from a trailer park was humiliated and expelled for not fitting in. Less than 24 hours later, one of the richest men in the country showed up for him. Cameras rolled. What followed became the most talked about moment in the school's history. Winston, North Carolina, 2013. A quiet spring morning settled over the town with dew still clinging to the blades of grass lining the sidewalks. At Gray Hill Academy, the oldest and most prestigious private school in the county, the administration held another closed-door meeting. Behind the polished oak doors, voices murmured with controlled intensity. Just outside, in the hallway lined with college pennants and framed newspaper clippings of alumni success, 16-year-old Zach Turner sat on a worn wooden bench. His backpack rested at his feet, scuffed and dusty, and his t-shirt bore faint smears of motor oil, evidence of the early morning he had spent helping his father repair their only working tractor. Zach lived on the edge of town, in a weathered trailer surrounded by open fields and rusting farm equipment. He had earned his place at Gray Hill through a scholarship, outperforming hundreds of applicants with his grades and test scores. But since day one, it had been clear that his presence there was tolerated, not welcomed. While other students drove to school in their parents' new cars and wore expensive sneakers, Zach showed up in patched jeans and hand-me-downs. He had become a quiet target of condescension, whispered jokes, and subtle exclusion from the social circles that ruled the school. Half an hour passed. Then the door opened, and Zach stepped out, pale and expressionless. In his hand, a folded slip of paper trembled slightly, though he held it tight. Around him, the school hummed to life. Students whispered, glancing in his direction. A few laughed under their breath. Someone leaned against a locker, arms crossed, smirking. Word traveled quickly. Zach Turner had been expelled. The official reason listed a string of minor infractions: failure to meet dress code standards, tardiness, an incident involving a broken beaker in chemistry class. None of it serious, none of it out of the ordinary for any other student. But Zach had no name, no connections, and no buffer of wealth or influence. The message was clear between the lines. He did not belong. Zach said nothing. He walked out through the front gates, past the trimmed hedges and the bronze statue of the school's founder. He crossed the quiet neighborhood, passing the rows of clean white porches and SUVs parked in driveways. Every step took him further from Gray Hill, further from the illusion that hard work alone was enough. By evening, he climbed onto the roof of the trailer, as he often did when he needed to think. The metal was still warm from the sun. He sat with the letter in his hands, watching the orange sky fade into purple. In the distance, a freight train rumbled across the flat landscape, its low call echoing over the fields. His father, Joe Turner, a graying mechanic with grease-stained hands and tired eyes, climbed up beside him without a word. They sat in silence, the paper crinkling softly in Zach's hand. For the first time, he felt something shift deep in his chest, an ache, heavy and unfamiliar. Everything he had worked for felt wasted, like seeds scattered on hard ground. The following morning, Gray Hill Academy eased into its usual rhythm. Teachers stood at classroom doors, checking off names on clipboards as students trickled in, balancing coffee cups, backpacks, and half-memorized formulas for the upcoming science exam. The morning air was crisp, the campus grounds immaculate, hedges trimmed to perfection, and the silence of the schoolyard broken only by murmurs and the ringing of lockers. At precisely 9:13 a.m., that silence cracked. A low, thunderous hum began to build in the distance, at first mistaken by many for a storm, but as the sound intensified, the sky above Gray Hill began to vibrate. Windows rattled, leaves fluttered from the trees, heads turned skyward. Emerging from behind the tree line, a dark gray helicopter with sleek contours and spinning rotors approached the campus. The words "NorthJet Logistics" gleamed in silver on its side, catching the morning sun. Within seconds, the helicopter descended rapidly, tilting slightly as it maneuvered over the soccer field. Dust and bits of dry grass whirled into the air in violent gusts. Alarmed by the noise and chaos, students flooded toward the windows, some already pulling out their phones to film. A few bolted from classrooms, drawn by curiosity. Teachers hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or follow. The usual order of the school dissolved into murmuring confusion. The helicopter touched down at the center of the athletic field, its landing skids settling with precision. The air around the craft roared with turbulent force, coats flapping and hair whipped in all directions. From the main building, the school principal, Miss Rivers, emerged briskly, her face strained with confusion and alarm. She clutched the edges of her blazer, trying to maintain composure as she hurried toward the commotion. The rotors began to slow, and the side door opened with a hiss of hydraulic release. From within, a tall man stepped out. He wore a dark overcoat and polished shoes that did not pick up a single speck of dust. His silver hair was neatly combed back, his eyes hidden behind a pair of sharp mirrored sunglasses. He walked with confidence and absolute calm. Behind him followed two suited assistants, one holding a sleek briefcase. Students standing at the edges of the field whispered urgently. They recognized him from business magazines and late-night news programs. Henry Westbrook, CEO of NorthJet Logistics, a billionaire whose face was associated with economic influence, innovation, and power. Once a name in textbooks, now a living, breathing presence walking across their school field. He said nothing as he scanned the crowd, his gaze cutting through the murmuring students and stunned faculty. He did not acknowledge the principal, who rushed toward him with outstretched hands and urgent words. Instead, his attention remained focused, steady. In one hand, he carried a narrow leather case, held with deliberate ease. The crowd watched in silence, uncertain and awestruck. Some raised phones higher for a clearer view. Others simply stared, trying to make sense of why a man of such stature had landed on their humble school grounds. It was only when Henry Westbrook stopped walking, turned slightly, and asked a question, one name, that the school collectively froze. He was looking for Zach Turner. The name hit like a dropped stone in water. The whisper rippled outward through the crowd. Teachers looked at each other. Students frowned, confused or wide-eyed. Miss Rivers' posture faltered, her face paling beneath the makeup. Her hands, still mid-gesture, slowly lowered. Just a day earlier, she had signed the official expulsion papers of a boy she had deemed insignificant. Now one of the most powerful men in the country had come, unannounced, to ask for that boy by name. On the outskirts of Winston, the air was still, filled with the familiar sense of engine oil, cut grass, and early spring dust. Zach crouched beside an old red pickup truck, its hood propped open and its front grille missing. Grease stained his fingertips, and a smudge of black ran across his cheek. His father, Joe Turner, worked on the other side of the vehicle, sleeves rolled to his elbows, weathered hands turning a socket wrench with steady rhythm. The two worked in quiet coordination, surrounded by tools scattered across the gravel and rusting machinery that hadn't run in years. The garage was a simple aluminum structure, patched in places with plywood and old signage. A radio played faintly from inside, barely audible over the occasional clank of metal on metal. Despite everything that had happened the day before, the scene was peaceful in its routine, almost comforting. Then the hum returned. It started faint, like distant thunder, but grew rapidly until the entire sky seemed to pulse. Joe looked up first, wrench still in hand, eyes narrowing. Zach followed, stepping back from the engine and wiping his hands on a rag. The sound was unmistakable. Seconds later, the full shape of the helicopter crested above the trees. The same NorthJet aircraft that had descended on the academy was now angling toward their modest property. The wind struck first, kicking up dirt and shaking the branches of a nearby oak tree. Zach and his father stepped out from under the garage's overhang, shielding their eyes. The helicopter descended steadily, its rotors sending waves of pressure rippling across the field. It landed just beyond the driveway, on a patch of flattened grass between the trailer and the woods. When the rotors slowed enough to reduce the dust storm, the door opened. Henry Westbrook stepped out, framed against the sleek, polished interior of the aircraft. Behind him came two security personnel in dark suits and a third man, young, clean-cut, holding a tablet in both hands. Zach remained frozen, stunned by the sight. It was surreal. The man walking toward them was a figure he had only seen on television and magazine covers, someone associated with skyscrapers and boardrooms, not dirt roads and aging pickups. Westbrook moved with calm purpose, his gaze sweeping across the property. He took in the peeling paint of the trailer, the scattered parts, the worn boots on Joe Turner's feet. His eyes paused on Zach, then shifted to the old man beside him. Recognition passed subtly across his face. Joe straightened his posture, visibly surprised but silent. Westbrook stopped a few feet away, taking in the surroundings with quiet intensity. His expression didn't carry judgment, only reflection, as if the scene stirred something long buried. What Zach didn't know was that decades earlier, Joe Turner had been a part-time mechanic at a rural freight depot where a young, ambitious Henry Westbrook was struggling to get his logistics idea off the ground. Joe had worked long hours, sometimes without pay, fixing forklifts and trucks that kept Westbrook's fragile operation running. Though they hadn't spoken since, Westbrook had never forgotten. The assistant stepped forward, tapping something on the tablet. He handed it to Westbrook, who began scrolling through a series of documents: academic transcripts, attendance reports, volunteer records. All Zach's work, all the effort he had poured into staying afloat at Gray Hill, was there in front of the billionaire. Westbrook studied the screen silently. He paused at certain sections: honors classes, notes from teachers, commendations from the community center. Then he handed the tablet back without comment. He looked at Zach again, this time longer, assessing, measuring, remembering. There were no questions, no lengthy explanations. The situation was clear enough. Westbrook had come to settle a debt, not of money, but of principle. He had built an empire on the backs of working-class people like Joe Turner, and now their son had been cast aside by the very system that claimed to reward merit. After another brief glance at the property, he gave a simple gesture, an invitation, unmistakable and firm. The meaning was clear. This wasn't the end of Zach's story. It was just the beginning, and he would not be left behind. The helicopter returned to Gray Hill Academy just after midday. Its distant roar stirred the quiet spring afternoon into motion, drawing attention before it was even visible. The students, already on edge from the previous day's unexpected landing, gathered in greater numbers this time. Word had spread across the town and through every hallway of the school. Henry Westbrook had come once, and now he was coming again. Faculty members stepped out of their offices. Classroom doors swung open. Phones were raised before the helicopter even touched down. As the aircraft descended, the scene unfolded like a choreographed spectacle. Dust swirled over the soccer field. Students lined the perimeter shoulder to shoulder, some standing on benches or planters to get a better view. The faculty attempted to keep order, but their own curiosity betrayed them. Even teachers clutched their phones, recording or snapping pictures, unsure whether to intervene or simply bear witness. The rotors slowed, the side door opened. Henry Westbrook stepped out first, as poised as he had been the day before. The billionaire's coat swayed gently with the downforce. His posture was unchanged, measured, controlled, deliberate. But this time, someone followed him. Zach Turner stepped out behind him. Gone were the grease-stained clothes and the slumped shoulders. He wore a clean, pressed shirt, dark jeans, and a new pair of boots. His hair was neatly combed, and though his eyes held traces of uncertainty, his posture was different. He stood taller. He didn't look around nervously or avert his gaze. His steps were calm, purposeful. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few phones tilted wildly, trying to capture both faces in one frame. Whispers turned to murmurs, then quiet awe. Some students stared in disbelief. Others froze, remembering the smirks and laughter from just days earlier. Zach didn't look at them. He didn't need to. Principal Rivers emerged from the main building, her face already pale. She moved quickly, but each step seemed heavier than the last. She clutched a folder to her chest, a veneer of authority that now felt fragile. Her eyes flickered between Westbrook and Zach, and for a brief second she hesitated. Westbrook didn't slow down. He walked directly toward the front of the assembly area, where the school board members had begun to gather in anticipation. The chairman, a graying man in a tweed jacket, nodded uncertainly as Westbrook approached. The tension was thick, pressing against every bystander. Cameras rolled, screens glowed. The weight of the moment settled over the campus like a storm. When Westbrook spoke, his voice carried across the courtyard. He did not raise it, but it resonated with clarity and gravity. He announced that Northjet Logistics was prepared to make a significant financial commitment to Gray Hill Academy, a multi-million-dollar grant intended to support curriculum expansion, infrastructure modernization, and inclusion initiatives. But it came with conditions. He outlined them with precision. Zach Turner must be reinstated immediately, and not as a token gesture. The school must also re-examine its policies regarding admissions and support for students from underserved backgrounds. Westbrook emphasized that the future of education belonged not to the privileged few, but to the determined many. The school, he declared, could no longer afford to be a gatekeeper of legacy and wealth alone. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. Some shifted on their feet. The principal remained silent, her posture rigid. The promise of such funding would not only rescue upcoming budgets, it would redefine the school's standing for a generation. Yet the cost was their pride, their authority, their decision from just days earlier. The students watched in silence. Many of them had never seen their leaders confronted so publicly. Many had never seen a man like Zach stand at the center of anything. After several long moments, a quiet but unmistakable ripple moved through the board. One of the members stepped forward and whispered something to the chairman. A nod followed, then another. Within minutes, a formal statement was made. The school issued an apology, not just to Zach Turner, but to every student who had ever been made to feel lesser. They declared his reinstatement and pledged to work with Westbrook's advisors on internal reform. Zach stood beside Westbrook throughout it all. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Around him, the crowd slowly began to shift. Students who had once mocked him now watched in uncertain silence. Teachers who had once ignored him now nodded quietly. It wasn't just a reinstatement, it was a reckoning. And Zach Turner had returned on his own terms. In the days that followed the public ceremony at Gray Hill Academy, the atmosphere around Zach Turner changed in quiet but undeniable ways. The same classmates who had once ignored him, mocked his clothes, or chuckled behind his back now approached him with awkward smiles and hesitant words. Some reached out to shake his hand, offering vague congratulations. Others simply nodded from a distance, their eyes shifting away if Zach looked too long. A few tried to engage him in small talk, as if eager to erase the memory of what had happened only a week earlier. But Zach felt the distance, even in their newfound politeness. The warmth was missing. It wasn't hate anymore, but it wasn't belonging either. The classrooms felt smaller now. The familiar hallways, once so intimidating, seemed quiet, almost faded. His teachers treated him with unusual deference, their tones more careful, their eyes more curious. But none of it reached him. The apology had been made, the reinstatement granted, but something deeper remained unsettled. Zach realized that he no longer saw the school as a place to grow, but as a place he had outgrown. Henry Westbrook, having completed his mission at Gray Hill, did not vanish into the corporate world as many expected. Instead, he invited Zach to visit the NorthJet headquarters in Atlanta. What began as a tour quickly evolved into something larger. Westbrook presented an offer, an invitation to join a leadership development program designed for young minds from underrepresented backgrounds. It wasn't charity, it was challenge. Zach would relocate, work alongside senior staff, rotate through departments, and learn the inner workings of one of the most influential companies in the country. The offer was real, demanding, and transformative. The decision was not immediate. Zach returned home to the outskirts of Winston. One evening, just before sunset, he sat alone on the front steps of the trailer. The light cast long shadows across the dry ground. The air smelled of diesel and pine. In the distance, cows moved lazily behind a broken fence line. He stared down the empty road he had biked to school every day. The road that led through fields, past faded signs, and eventually toward a life he had thought he wanted. Inside, his father worked on an old carburetor, humming softly to a country station playing through a crackling radio. The sound was familiar, grounding. This place, this land, this life had shaped Zach. It had taught him grit, patience, and responsibility. He owed everything to it. But as he sat on the worn wooden steps, the paper in his hand fluttering lightly in the breeze, he understood something with absolute clarity. Growth demanded distance. Atlanta represented more than just a city or a company. It was a place where no one knew him as the kid from the trailer, no one expected him to fail, and no one would look at his boots before his eyes. It was a clean slate, but also a high bar. The path ahead would be harder than anything Gray Hill had ever thrown at him. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of that. Zach looked out over the rows of tools and spare parts, the oil-stained gravel, and the field beyond where he had spent his entire life. He wasn't leaving out of anger. He wasn't walking away from something. He was walking toward it. And when the next morning came, the answer had already settled in his chest like something long overdue. He was ready. 1 week later, Zach Turner stood on the cracked pavement outside his home, the morning sun rising slowly behind the trailer that had been his entire world. His backpack was lighter than it had ever been. No textbooks, no assignments, no hall passes. Instead, it carried a laptop, a folder of contracts, a worn notebook, and a quiet sense of anticipation. His father stood beside him, hands in his pockets, silent but present. Zach's mother lingered on the porch, eyes glassy but proud, waving once before turning inside. The ride to the train station was quiet, the road familiar, lined with faded billboards and roadside mailboxes leaning from years of wind and rain. A few neighborhood friends had gathered by the platform offering backslaps, grins, and awkward goodbyes. They spoke in short phrases, some teasing, others sincere. They didn't know exactly what Zach was going to do, but they knew he was going somewhere none of them had gone before. His father gave him a firm embrace, one hand lingering on Zach's shoulder longer than usual. No words were exchanged. None were needed. On the platform, a man in a tailored jacket approached, one of Westbrook's assistants, clipboard under one arm, a digital tablet in the other. He handed Zach the device without ceremony. The screen lit up with a detailed itinerary, onboarding sessions, mentor meetings, departmental briefings, and a list of names Zach had never heard before. Each line represented a new challenge, a new step forward. Zach boarded the train a few minutes later. He found a window seat, dropped his bag at his feet, and sat back as the whistle blew. The engine lurched, and the landscape of Winston began to roll slowly past the glass. Fenced-in yards, dirt roads, old barns, and soybean fields gave way to open stretches of southern countryside. He rested his head against the window and watched it all slip behind him, mile by mile. He didn't feel fear. He felt motion, momentum, a quiet understanding that the hardest part was not the leaving, but accepting that he was no longer who he had been. In the weeks that followed, Zach's story spread beyond the borders of his town. A local newspaper ran a front-page article about the farm boy who changed Gray Hill. Then came radio segments, interviews, even a short television feature. His face became known not for scandal or pity, but for potential. He became a symbol of quiet perseverance, of what could happen when someone powerful chose to lift instead of judge. 2 years later, Zach Turner returned to Winston, not as a student, not as the boy in hand-me-down shoes, but as the founder of a nonprofit dedicated to supporting rural youth in education and career access. He stood on the stage of Gray Hills Assembly Hall beneath the same chandeliers that once lit the day of his expulsion. This time, he wasn't the one seated in the back row. He was the one behind the podium. Students listened, faculty nodded, and in the crowd, a handful of wide-eyed kids from the outskirts of town sat forward in their seats, seeing something in him that he had once struggled to see in himself. Zach had taken the road out, and now he had come back to build a few more.